Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining our first day of Global Inclusion Week. This is Joni Saphir. I am in charge of internal communications here, and I am happy to welcome this panel. A couple of quick housekeeping. Everyone will be on mute. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it into your chat window, and we'll get to the questions at the end of the panel. Also, just to remind you, we've got some really great events coming up. Tomorrow, we've got Can You Automate Without a Mouse with Paul Wilshaw and Stacey Ray about adapting our products for those with special needs. Wednesday, we've got Black professionals in intelligent automation. And we also have a WERPA event in Singapore. On Thursday, we have another WERPA event. And on Friday, we'll have some recordings available about why inclusion is important. Anyway, you can find all those links on the Prism. And without further ado, I would like to welcome Matt Juden-Bloomfield for the panel.
Thanks, Joni. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining. So I'll do a quick intro. My name's Matt Juden-Bloomfield. For those of you who don't know me, I am our head of automation internally, which means that I basically help us to use our product and also to be more efficient as a company. The other thing I do is run Blue Prism for Good, which is our global CSR program. And what that aims to do is to sort of give back and help use our product for some good. And then more recently, I've got involved in running our Pride ERG, which is a new thing. This is only our second event, but I'm really pleased to be joined by two of our colleagues internally. The name is just, synonymous apparently. Everyone, just Andrew, we get them all. But I'll hand over to you guys to just do a quick intro. And then we are meant to be joined by Sarah from Avanade. We are having a slight issue in just tracking her down, so it might be that she's having problems getting in, but we'll sort of manage it irrespective. But Andrew, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm Andrew Campbell. I do marketing for the Blue Prism Digital Exchange. So on the products and marketing side, sort of help our customers get more out of the digital exchange and help our partners promote their products through digital exchange. So that's what I'm doing, and I'm based in Austin, Texas.
Thanks, Andrew. Andy?
Hi, everyone. My name's Andy Patrick. I'm an Alliances Manager at Blue Prism. I've been with Blue Prism for about 3 years now, the first 2 years of which I was based in our Tokyo office. So managing our relationship with local partners there in Japan. And since about a year ago, I've joined the EMEA GSI team, and I'm currently based in London.
Joining me here in London, amazing. Well, welcome guys, thanks so much for joining us today. For everyone who's joined and is kind of sitting there going, I wonder what this session is going to entail. Well, let me tell you. So we thought we'd start off really by just kind of explaining why this is a topic that needs discussed today, and frame sort of the wider context of the LGBTQ community. We're then going to hear a little bit of the stories of the guys, and I'll now chip in myself if we're unable to get Sarah involved, and ask a couple of questions just sort of about what it means to each of the people on the call today of sort of being a member of the LGBTQ community, and I guess issues that have been faced and sort of how you've dealt with it. And really the hope is that for anyone who's joined the call who maybe is having sort of identity issues of their own, it can sort of find a bit of solace and comfort in sort of hearing some stories from people who've been there, done that, got the t-shirt and come out the other side. And also just to sort of introduce you to some friendly faces from around the business and around the globe as well, who can also be a reference or a support. So I guess let's get started on framing the context. You'll have to excuse me, I'm trying to get this going. Can you see that? Yep.
Works.
Fabulous. So what does LGBTQ mean? Well, this page hopefully gives you a bit of an insight. L stands for lesbian, G stands for gay, B stands for bisexual. T stands for transgender or trans, which means that someone who is assigned themselves, they sort of identify themselves a different gender to that they were assigned at birth. And Q or plus and or both is sort of a term meaning queer and indeed sort of other people outside of the binaries that we kind of convey ourselves to be in. And so ultimately, some people would state themselves as queer because they don't want to fall into a particular stereotype. You know, there's a narrative that actually your sexuality is quite a fluid sort of spectrum in which, you know, you don't need to necessarily define yourself as any one thing. You kind of go with the wind. And I suppose, you know, you do you is ultimately the sort of the main message here. Well, I suppose the main message actually is you do you, and it's okay to do whatever you want, is that sort of main message. So why is it still important? Well, in 2020, it's still illegal in 73 countries around the world to be gay. It's also punishable by death in 12 countries. And it's only legal to get married in 24 countries around the world today. So, you know, a huge swathe of the world is actually still pretty anti-LGBTQ+. So some of the countries where it's illegal today are countries like Lebanon, St. Lucia, Barbados, Kenya. Some of the countries where it's punishable by death are countries like Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, Afghanistan, Pakistan. And then in terms of countries where it's legal to be married, the Netherlands was the first country to legalize gay marriage in 2000, and Costa Rica was the most recent, legalizing back in March. And another sort of fun fact, although it's not quite so fun, is that you may not realize that actually in the UK, although it was legal to be married as a homosexual couple in 2013, that actually only was stretched to Northern Ireland this year. So only as of January was it legal for a homosexual couple in Northern Ireland to get married. And the reason we say all of these things is that I think there is generally an assumption. A lot of us work in the United States or the United Kingdom, or indeed sort of some of the wider, more developed countries around the world, where, you know, people's identity, people's sexuality are generally things that, you know, we accept and sort of understand that there are going to be different people outside of our kind of normal groups. But unfortunately, in a whole swathe of the world, and indeed in a lot of our sort of countries that indeed we operate in, for example, UAE or Singapore, it's still a problem, and it's still something that, you know, many people in the LGBT community specifically feel that they then have to hide. And so this is where the power of groups like this, the ERG groups, really come into their own. It allows an opportunity for people who are maybe really struggling with their own identity, struggling to feel that they've got a voice, to find people who are similar to them, be able to share experiences and just kind of find some safety. So this is why it's really important. And hopefully, you know, you'll learn a couple of things, but I think, you know, firstly, thank you for joining and taking the time to listen. Couple of other facts for you. So 7% of men and 13% of women identify as non-heterosexual, which means that they fall anywhere within the LGBTQ spectrum. 50% of the US LGBTQ community are not out at work, meaning that they don't feel comfortable to sort of say that in their office space. 40% of the homeless population in the United States are LGBTQ+, again, highlighting some of the big issues within that the LGBT community is that it can often lead to a lot of stigma, and people who are unfortunately not accepted by their families often end up having to sort of leave home or you know, live out on the streets. And it's a horrible statistic that there are, you know, an increasing number of LGBT community people who are in that position. Some people you may have heard of. Sally Ride was the first LGBTQ lady into space, and she orbited in 1983. Oscar Wilde, you may or may not know that he was gay. He was jailed for 2 years in 1895. Gay conversion therapy is still legal in the UK and in 28 of the US states, which I was actually on a date a couple of weeks ago, and the guy told me that some of his best friends had actually been converted by the church and were now married to women happily. And wasn't that admirable? And I had to say, no, you know, it's not admirable in my eyes that someone would do something that, you know, isn't what is true to them just because the church is saying so. And it's shocking that that is still, you know, a legal practice. A fun fact for you is that only 2 of the village people were actually gay. The rest just pretended. That's a nice fun one. And you may have joined in our celebrations in June to celebrate Pride Month. That take place every year, and because of lockdown, kind of extended well out into the summer, really just to celebrate the culture that surrounds the LGBTQ community. I've realised that I've spelt it wrong in like so many of the different ones, so apologies. And we've got coming up in the 12th of October is National Coming Out Day, which is again to promote and support issues of LGBTQ rights and also the concept of coming out, which I know that Andy is going to touch on in a second. So that then leads us on to the question of what does it mean to be LGBTQ? So let's see whose slide is up first. Oh, no one's slide is up first. 1 second, apologies. So Andy, if I ask the question of sort of what does it mean to you and what's your story, maybe you can kind of talk us through your quote that you've got on the screen here.
Yeah, sure. What does LGBTQ mean to me? I think this is a very difficult question to answer, but I think maybe I can illustrate it through my own coming out story. I grew up in the Bay Area, California, which is a very liberal area. San Francisco is known by many gay men to be sort of a gay mecca. So from an early age, I definitely saw a lot of figures in my life who were gay, and it was a normal thing within my own community. I came out fairly early when I was around 15, which I believe I was very fortunate to be able to do just because of the community I was within. But ever since, I've still had to come out many times to different people, right? Like I say on my quote on the screen here, you know, coming out is not a one-off thing. You constantly have to come out to any new person that you meet, whether it's a new organization that you're joining to work for, or whether it's a customer or a partner like the ones that I have to deal with on a daily. So it is really comforting to know that certain companies foster a culture that is more supportive of this coming out. And I guess what I would like to see through this event and through our ERG is to make people feel comfortable enough to be their authentic selves within the workplace.
Thanks, Andy. That's a really nice message. I've just seen that we've got Rench on, which is great news. So I'll do an intro of you in a sec. Andrew, do you want to do your slide?
Yeah, sure. So my story is very kind of not too different from the story Matt just shared a little bit ago. So I actually didn't come out until 4 years ago, after many decades of basically just denying reality. I grew up in a very religious family. Ironically enough, perhaps in the Boston area, which is very liberal, but not my family. So I just, from an early age, told myself this is just a delusion, and went forward. Ended up getting married to a woman who's still one of my best friends. We had 2 daughters. So I am a dad to Ellery, who is 8, and Vaughn, who is 6. And basically, you know, 4 years, 5, well, it'll be 4 years ago, yeah. I kind of came to a point where I realized kind of can't deny this any further. And the first person I came out to was actually a colleague at the office, not at Blue Prism, but at a previous company that was also UK based and also very open about LGBTQ inclusion. So that was sort of the start of an interesting phase of my life where I've really enjoyed something really interesting. I mentioned how the experience of LGBTQ people can actually influence our straight allies. And I come from basically enjoying a lot of the privilege of being a straight white male. And I've really come to understand, first of all, experiencing some rather painful discriminatory incidents over the last few years, that it is a real thing that I didn't experience before. And that's made me largely shut up, honestly, and listen to the people who aren't typically heard from. So, that's actually probably the biggest change for me, has been stepping back, listening more, and helping to elevate the voices of the marginalized. So that's, in a nutshell, my story.
No, it's a lovely story. Really brave as well for you to sort of speak out and speak so openly and honestly. So thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so before we go on to my slide, I'd really love to introduce Rench, who's come up on the screen as Robin. It's not Robin, it's a lie. So let me explain who Sarah is, and we'll then go and you can sort of do your own little intro. So Sarah Rench, also known as Rench, is the Director of Data, AI and Industry Solutions at Avanade, and covers FSI globally, as well as supporting CXOs with intelligent automation and data transformation programs. Rench recently placed on the Yahoo Finance Heroes Award as Future Leader in top 5 out of the top 50, and was on the list for the most influential women in UK tech top 100 2019, and is also one of the Women in Data 20 in Data 2019 winners. So we should all be very intimidated, I think. But Rench, I'll hand over to you to just do a quick hello, but also, if you could share, I guess, sort of what LGBTQ means to you, and maybe share your own story.
Well, thank you, Matt, for the intro, and apologies. Despite any of those great accolades, it doesn't stop me from having a blue screen of death shortly before I meant to join an amazing webinar. So apologies for that, for not being for
Not
the
at all.
intro. But yeah. So interestingly, I probably relating to Andrew's story slightly. I throughout school I was kind of like, oh, I think I fancy women, but I'm not sure. But it felt everyone else was straight, so it didn't seem like it was normal. And then I went to uni and had someone hit on me, and then I was like, oh my god, the penny just dropped. I was like, okay, so I'm definitely not 100% straight, and then float somewhere between like bi and gay on the spectrum. But then kind of struggled with, okay, where how do I label myself, how do I define myself, and went through this kind of exploratory journey. And now sadly single, but previously I was dating a woman for 5 years, and there was a real roller coaster of kind of, well, what does this mean? How does it impact life? How do I come out to my friends and family? And that kind of journey. And I've had lots of different mixed experiences, from being on that journey. I've had times when I felt really part of a community and like felt really loved, and also sometimes felt isolated. And it really is like a personal journey that you go through. And I really relate to Andy's quote as well. And Andrew reflected as well. You are constantly coming out, because if you join a new company or you meet new people, then a question might arise, oh, so tell me about your partner. And some people don't even phrase, they just presume. In my case, often they go, oh, tell me about your husband or your X or Y, and then I'm like, oh, well, by the way, that
It's
man
so
you
awkward.
perceive me to be with. Yeah, I know. And also I'm quite effeminate, so I paint my nails and all of that, so I don't seem to conform completely to this stereotype. So there's lots of learnings from that, and I'm sure the other, like Andy and Andrew, can relate as well.
It's interesting because the stereotype thing was exactly my journey. Like for me, I didn't. So I was a little bit like Andrew, although I didn't get married and have kids. But I was later in sort of life. I wasn't quite Andy in sort of recognizing that I was sort of gay in my teens. Although I think when I reflect on it, I definitely knew. I just had suppressed it, because actually, for me, I didn't identify with what I saw to be as gay people. Like out at Pride and sort of wearing glitter or whatever. Like, I did, you know, that's taking it to the absolute nth degree, but I just didn't personally relate to that. Like, that wasn't me. So then I kind of equated in my young brain, and I was like, well, I don't equate to that, so therefore I'm not that. And it was only really like later in sort of my early 20s, I met a guy who's one of my best friends when I was at Deloitte, and he is very openly gay, but also just very good at his job, very, you know, he was smashing life and, you know, getting promoted and whatever. And I was kind of like, you know, I want to do good in business and stuff. And I previously equated that to being straight and, you know, heterosexual. And so when I saw someone who I kind of found as a bit of a role model, to be like, well, actually, he's doing all of this and he's gay and everyone accepts him and thinks he's great. That for me was like my kind of like wake up call to be like, well, actually, I can be like that too. And I suppose the thing for me, I wouldn't say that I'm the best gay ever. Like I you know, I don't go to a ton of events and whatever, but I think the thing for me is having been that person who felt that they couldn't speak about it and was so scared and anxious to sort of bring it up. I would love to sort of help anyone who has that, because it's a tough thing when you're like struggling with your identity and what people are going to think of you. And so the quote that's on the screen essentially is saying that, you know, I think your sexuality should be so uninteresting. Like, you know, no one goes, oh, you've got brown eyes. Okay, weird. Like, no one does that. So, like, you know, equally, it should be the same about someone's sexuality. And I think, having sort of now sat both sides of the fence, I can definitely see that it's getting better. However, on Andrew's point of like being able to sort of play the sort of straight white guy card, you know, it has its advantages. Like, if you want to fit in with the lads and, you know, have chat about like girls and football and something, I mean, I can make it up, like so it definitely, you know, you kind of get that, but I think it's promising to see. So I suppose that's sort of my journey. There's Rench's slide. Sorry, I did that a bit prematurely then. So I guess the question is, having heard your stories and ultimately kind of what got you to who you are today, what would you say, how do you manage, I suppose, your own identity, and what kind of got you to the point where you're sort of more comfortable in yourself to then speak out loud? Andy, I'll maybe go to you first.
Yeah, sure. So I guess sort of evident from me coming out early, I'm very comfortable with my sexual identity and sharing it with people. I never really feel that intimidated by it. But having worked in Japan for a couple of years, that changed a bit because I felt that there was a lot more at stake. Oftentimes I'd meet with my partners for dinner or drinks, and, you know, inevitably the conversation would lead to questions about partners, if I'm seeing anyone, if not, why not, what type of girls are your type, things like that that are fairly common within Japan and maybe across Asian culture as well. These questions I felt, you know, whenever I was asked these questions, I felt torn because morally, as an LGBTQ plus person, I would like to openly come out to these people and be true to myself. But on the other hand, these aren't just personal relationships that I'm forming with my partners and customers. Oftentimes, whatever I say can affect the team that's been working on an opportunity or a deal or something like that. So I never really felt comfortable coming out to my partners or customers. And oftentimes I would pretend that I was straight, which, you know, it is something that I feel very guilty about. But, you know, these are just some consequences of having to deal with this in the workplace. You can have a very inclusive organization and a workplace that you work for that allows you to be yourself. But then if you are in a customer facing role, those things can change. And I think that can only change if society as a whole is accepting.
It's interesting you mentioned the guilt, because the guilt, I think, is something that you don't necessarily realize as an emotion at the sort of the first instance of you kind of going, okay, well, I'm going to sort of recognize that I'm gay or whatever. But I personally found that there was a guilt that I was sort of, you know, in some way like letting people down by not conforming, you know, as if like that was sort of a prerequisite to making people happy, was following this tick box exercise. And interestingly, in the workplace as well, it was almost like feeling guilty for sort of making other people feel uncomfortable by being honest about yourself, which again is a really bizarre situation, but it happens. Like when I first joined the company up here, there was someone who was in role as the head of professional services, and he's no longer with the business. But he was very homophobic and would always bring it up in meetings with me when he found out, and would always sort of make comments that made me feel quite uncomfortable. And because I was new, like I felt really guilty about the fact that I was like almost creating this situation and didn't, you know, I never raised it or brought it up, and he got let go for other reasons. But like it's an interesting one where that prevented me from being honest and like seeking help and asking. So it's an interesting one. Andrew, what's your experience of it?
Yeah, so for the most part, it's been, I would say, just go with the flow. So it comes up at various points just in conversation as I'm trying to develop rapport with colleagues. Last year at the Global Sales Kickoff, actually had several conversations with a number of folks from across sales and marketing. And that really sealed it for me that it is a safe place to just be real. I think it also developed a certain relationship between myself, a newer employee at the time, and a lot of my colleagues, that they were comfortable being themselves because I was comfortable being myself. So yeah, I would say it's just kind of an easy, something that wasn't easy, obviously, many years ago, has become just off the cuff, like discussing, my college experience. Yeah.
Yeah. And Rench, your experience, I'll slightly tailor the question because, as a leader, you've got people underneath you in sort of multiple geographies. I guess, how do you, as someone who, has obviously accepted their own sort of identity, how do you help people around you and within your team to do the same, but also to respect, the views and the sort of identities of others?
Yeah, so I can relate. When I first started my first job, like probably about 10 years ago, and I was much more junior then, but it was a global role. So I managed 24 websites across Europe. Now, so that meant I work with people from Spain, Russia, and if I compare to like my coming out story then to where I am now, it has got easier because of my seniority. But then I still face challenges even today. I consciously hire diverse teams. So you want to then instill that ethos. And by speaking on, with you guys today, by being open about my sexuality, like I've presented it like Lesbians Who Tech and things like that, to be someone who people can talk to if they need to. But that doesn't escape the challenges you also face on a day-to-day. I've had a team member who worked with me for a year building a CRM system. I had his daughter in for work experience. I was his boss. Openly turn around and say, oh, I don't think gay people could ever be prime minister and would have children. I had a colleague, when I came out to them in confidence, then tell the others as gossip. So I've had some horror stories.
Yeah.
But what I've learned is actually, by being part of the kind of LGBT networks, there is a sense of community there, and that can help foster it. And also, as you get more senior, you have this responsibility to also call it out when it's not okay. But then you can lead to being, if you're the only, myself as an example, I specialize in AI. I started off as a software developer, so I was used to working with all male teams, and I would have mixed reactions sometimes because I would be the only woman in the room, also sometimes the only, gay bi woman in the room, and they'd find that curious. And then on top of that, I happen to have an invisible disability. I'm a diabetic since the age of 2, so intersectionality plays a huge part. And it impacts all of us. I couldn't say to, I had a colleague who was coming out as being trans. And actually, lots of my friends call me Rench, mainly because of a Foo Fighters song when I was younger. But in solidarity, as I was going on, I said, do you know what? I'll get everyone to call me Rench. It won't be an issue. And the difference in how people interacted with me was remarkable, because they kind of looked at me like, wait, are you a guy? I was like, well, no, I was born a woman, but that's besides the point. But you
Yeah.
shouldn't be having this issue with basically my name or how I identify. It should be about the quality of work I do, and that is the focus. And every person who's kind of coming out in the workplace will face a very different, unique situation. And as a leader, you're trying to support that in the best way you can possible. So now, I openly support all the LGBT, the BAME networks, any kind of like inclusion and diversity thing that I can. But to say there aren't challenges with diversity, it would be a lie. And all we can do is actually try and focus on how we support the individuals in doing that.
I totally agree, and I think from my perspective, the main thing is that even being given the sort of the comfort, the psychological comfort to say, here's a platform, you can speak about this in an open way, kind of like we're doing today, is a step in the right direction to sort of help encourage these conversations that for many people are uncomfortable. It's not easy to talk about personal things. It's not easy to talk about your identity. It's not easy to talk about, sort of core parts of who you are. But I think the more that we can do stuff like this, be it in an LGBT community way, be it in sort of wider diverse minority groups, giving people that floor, I think it really starts to help change the narrative that actually it really is okay to be who you are, and sort of bring that to work, bring your whole self to work, not just the bits that you think people want. So the next question that I've got is, what would you say to anyone who is struggling, maybe with their identity, and finding it hard to sort of vocalize how they're feeling? And Andrew, as you were sort of maybe one of the more recent ones, or probably with the bigger identity sort of battle you had to overcome, I wonder if we could start with you.
Sure. So that's a great question. Thinking back maybe 5 years ago, when I started to truly wrestle with reality and unpacking things that I had really sealed up tight, probably the biggest thing for me was just taking a step back to think about what was true, what was true for me, what was not influenced by others, by society, by my family. And then starting to dig into stories. So I consumed a lot of content on YouTube, a lot of blog articles from people who had gone through this path before me. And to this day, some of those people have become really close friends. I have served sort of in a similar role for others. So just this weekend, I was texting with a guy in Seattle who is about 4 years behind me in the process, and connected his wife with my ex-wife. They've had some great conversations over the weekend, giving him and his current wife a lot of hope for the other side of things, because this is a super common thing. What I wanted to say about the last question, or add to it, is that it's sort of a practice makes perfect thing. There's not one moment where we achieve comfort with inclusivity. I think it's as we continually come out, as we continually develop relationships with people different from us, that we have the opportunity to build that strength. It's just a muscle that we are developing and growing.
I really like thinking of it like that. Thank you, Andrew. That's a really nice sentiment. Andy, I guess looking to you and sort of how people you might sort of be struggling with their identity, it'd be interesting as well, maybe if you could add sort of a lens of, I guess, the Asia sort of context versus sort of where you are now in London.
Yeah, I think obviously, I think across Asia, it's a little more conservative than, say, the UK or US, especially in Japan, where I think being gay is not necessarily seen as an issue of identity, but rather more something like a hobby or something like that where it's on your side. So I think a lot of people, when they hear that I'm gay, they question why I need to put that at the forefront of my identity and link that to who I am. So that can be a bit difficult when you're trying to have conversations around that. But I think, you know, when I'm in a Western country, when I'm speaking English, I think a lot of people can maybe take cues about my sexuality, maybe because of my voice. But believe it or not, when I speak Japanese, my voice is about an octave lower. So a lot of the times I'm a lot more passing as a heterosexual
I love that.
man that I am. So that can sometimes be a problem where, you know, it's oftentimes it might be easier if someone assumes something about you, assumes that you're gay before you have to come out, because then you're not sort of breaking any illusions that they might have around that. But in terms of what I would say to anyone struggling with their identity, it's, you know, ultimately, I think we all have to do what makes us happy, and it can be very scary to do that. And whenever I am coming out to someone for the first time, I'm terrified about their reaction, really. I don't really know what to expect, but I think about, you know, how will coming out affect my career? Will it mean that I won't be considered for a specific promotion? Does it mean I won't be able to relate to this person, or they just might not want to form a bond with me? Things like that do cross my mind, but after I do come out, you know, the reaction is fairly positive, and I realize that I've been sort of overreacting, or, you know, sort of creating scenarios in my head that might be more negative than what it turned out to be. So I would say it's, you know, people don't care that much what your sexuality is in the end of the day, which I find to be very comforting. And I hope that we one day as a society can have, you know, everyone will just not really care about that, and we wouldn't have to have these groups in the future.
It's so true. Like it's never mind just thinking about sexuality, but it's kind of where, you know, for example, you've rung a friend and they didn't pick up the phone, and you're like, oh, they're just ignoring me. You know, it's like that weird psychological place that you get yourself in where you think that everyone is thinking about you, and the sexuality thing then just augments that, where you're like, they're gonna then hate me, or, you know, I'm not gonna get invited to that party or whatever. And it's then like, and genuinely no one even cares, because all they care about is themselves. Like, you know, everyone is so focused on what they're doing and their life and their whatever, that it's so much less of a big deal. And I think in some ways, like, I remember building up in my head that I was going to come out to, you know, a friend, or even to like a family member, and then it being so anticlimactic afterwards, where they were like, yeah, I knew, or like, so and it was kind of like, oh, right, well, I guess let's move on. But yeah, no, I think that's a really good piece of advice, Sandy. Thank you. Rench, what about you?
I think, yeah, I think you're right with yeah, I reflect all the comments as well. I think what I will say is sometimes we struggle to define where we are on that spectrum. Like everyone's like, oh, so you're gay. Oh, wait, so you're bi. Oh, so you're straight. Like that is actually stressful in itself, because when you're questioning, you're like, oh, wait. And then if you think about gender identities, you know, you can be one of multiple now. And that's actually that can cause you stress, because then you don't know how to come out. You're like, well, 80% of the time I fit in this category, and then 10% I fit here, and then 10% I literally have no idea where I am on that spectrum. And sometimes, you know, sometimes that can impact the reaction, because actually if you're like, right, I'm definitely gay, or I'm definitely straight, or I'm definitely bi, it can sometimes be easier to come out. And actually what I would say from personal reflection is actually try not pressure yourself to worry about that, because, you know, and as your other comments have reflected, you know, people sometimes do find it easier if you label yourself, but then don't feel confined to whatever that label is. If you come out as gay and then actually go, oh, actually I really fancy this guy and fall in love with him, then don't be restricted to falling in love with who you want to be, you know. And I think when you're also then thinking about it, if you are unfortunate and your friends are not being supportive, then don't take it internally and think, oh God, it's my fault, or I've done something wrong, because actually it's a poor reflection on them. and do seek outside, look at the groups, the LGBT groups, the support communities, because you'll find people who've probably gone through the same experience of you. And I have people who I'm no longer friends with actually because they didn't handle it well. But for me, I've not taken, and at the time I internalized that. I thought, oh God, it's me, or I've handled it wrong, or I should have come out as bi, or whatever. But actually, flash forward 10 years, I've got the most incredible set of friends. I've had the most amazing relationships, and that means, those people are so much more valuable in my life than the people who weren't okay with it. So yeah, it's my personal feedback, and also reflecting yours.
I'm laughing because I totally relate, and I think that loads of other people who are joining or watching this in afterfact will be feeling the same. Is that that it's so true where we sort of build this up, and actually it's not that at all. And I think I know loads of people did the same. They go, oh well, I'm bi. I'll go for this like halfway house because that's somewhat more acceptable. And like, I remember my mum was a bit confused and she was like, so when do you think you might not be bi anymore? Like, well, I don't know if it's going to happen like that, mum. Like, it's not like I'm going to just like morph like a butterfly, but I was like, we'll get there and it will be fine. But I don't know about you all, but I sort of think the interesting thing from my perspective was that people who I had like probably the most worry about in terms of telling ended up almost being like some of the greatest allies, because like I remember one of my best friends who I was very nervous about, like from an Arabic family, very, very conservative, like quite religious. And I was like, oh my God, like this is it, over. And actually, I mean, one of the things that he said to me at the time was like, if anyone reacts badly to you, he was like, let me know because I'll talk to them. But he was like, but it's not a reflection on you. Like literally what you were saying, Rench, like, that is entirely their fault and their issue, and it's nothing to do with you. And I kind of still say that to myself today when I get that weird, awkward butterfly situation of like, oh, I have to come out again. Like I sort of remind myself like, well, it's fine, it's on them and it's not on me. So my piece of advice to anyone who's listening who's struggling with their identity, like I put 3 things down. The first one is that Andrew touched on, you've only got one life, so you might as well be doing in many ways what you want and who you want. But equally it gets easier the more times you speak about it. That first time you'll probably feel very sick, even just acknowledging it to yourself, but that's kind of then half the battle, and then it just becomes so much easier. And the final thing is, there's a really great quote, and I wish I could remember who said it, but it's, other people's opinions are none of my business. And actually, don't worry about what other people's opinions are, because that point I said at the beginning of this, that actually it's not that big a deal. So a question before we go into the Q&A, I suppose would be to all 3 of you, what would you look for, or what would you kind of hope for in colleagues or indeed companies to sort of help promote more of a inclusive working culture?
I'll jump in with one. We talked about this, and I know some of the folks in the US or America's Pride group have done this, but adding your pronouns to your signature in your email. Personally, I really appreciate for myself just being able to see that. I've seen a meme going around lately that you wouldn't be offended if somebody misgendered your dog, but you would be if they insisted on continually misgendering your dog once you told them. So in the same way, if a person corrects you, it should just be this is a normal thing that I've been corrected and I can go on. But I know for individuals, we can help each other by being upfront and transparent about our preferred pronouns, for example.
That's a really good point. I am guilty. I don't have that in my email, so I need to get on and do that. I was writing it down as something to share afterwards. Rench, what about you?
I'm just checking I wasn't on mute. I think pronouns are a really important thing actually, and having a colleague in one of my previous companies come out, that made a huge difference to them because they were actually going through being transgender. In my case, I actually leave my pronoun as ambiguous because actually I do it intentionally because I go by Sarah Rench, but actually to some people it's really important, and to me actually I because I've been a woman in tech, actually them questioning whether I'm a man or a woman in an email thread sometimes plays to my advantage because actually I assimilate in that. But for companies, I think making it easy for people to access the LGBT networks, having one, being able to have those kind of role models in those figures. But if they don't have them, which is often the case, actually inviting guest speakers in and enabling access, time in the calendars for people to speak to people in other networks. I think cross collaboration, with Avanade and Blue Prism is brilliant because actually I'm getting to meet you guys and listen to your experience in that collaborative nature. But then what that also means is that, say one of my gay male colleagues comes out to me and goes, do you know what, I'm going through X or Y. I go, oh, actually, I just met these really great guys on a panel. You should speak to them. And interlinking people, sharing that collaborative experience is really helpful because, they may not feel comfortable in your own company, but speaking to a mentor or, a cross colleague who's shared that experience is really, really powerful, and I've had really great mentors, friends, people I've spoken to at different stages, and they've helped me with not just my sexuality, but my career path. How do I overcome this problem? So I think actually companies enabling LGBT network collaborations and finding people you can talk to both within work and outside work really help with coming out.
Thanks, Rench. Andy.
Yeah, this is a bit of a small point that I touched on before, but I think just keeping questions as neutral as possible is really important. I love interacting with my colleagues and forming relationships with them and learning more about their personal life. Inevitably, someone will ask the question, do you have a wife? Do you have kids? Things like that. And those questions can be quite constricting because the only way that I can get out of those types of questions is to say, no, I don't have a wife, but I have a boyfriend, or I'm gay, XYZ. So I think, just even the small effort of someone asking, oh, do you have a partner, or do you have a wife or a husband? Are you seeing something a little bit more open-ended will give that person the opportunity to say something that is more truthful and honest about themselves.
It's a really good point. Thanks, Andy. I guess the sort of small bits that I quite like looking for in a company is even just as down to like having the rainbow incorporated into the logo, even just for pride or kind of more longer term. But I think for those people who are struggling and kind of looking for safe houses and the psychological safety to be like, do you know what, if I was to explore that avenue, I'll be accepted and I'll be okay there. And I think that as a very small part is really important. But I also think that being given a platform and a medium a bit like this, where we were asked to sort of come and chat, I think it's really nice that we're being promoted and enabled in that way. And I suppose for those people who are in a position of power, give your team, give your colleagues, give your peers the opportunity to do something similar, because for you it might not seem that important, but actually for other people, it really can bring everyone a little bit closer and drive that cross collaboration that Rench was talking about, and just sort of give that sort of safety net. The analogy that I use to describe coming out, I'll share because I think that it went down quite well last time I shared it, is that I described it as finding another room in your house. So you've lived in this house for so long and you're so comfortable with it, and it's really comfortable, it smells like you, it's really recognizable, but then one day you just walk into this other room and you're like, oh, I didn't know this was here. And it's really comfortable, and again it's sort of it's like you, but it's totally new all at the same time. And so it takes a bit of time to like get used to it, but only when you have that sort of safety and sort of comfort around you to be like, do you know what, like, use that room, is when you do. And so that's why work, where we spend a whole swathe of our time doing, that providing a sort of safety comfort zone is really important to make sure that you do get to use that room. So yeah, hopefully if you're sitting there going, I wasn't sure what it was like, well, hopefully you can use my room analogy. The next bit we're going to move on to is just with regards to resources. So, Andrew, I'll maybe ask you, as you are our sort of great slide puller together, to maybe just walk us through maybe some of the resources that you might recommend.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of countries have specific organizations for their own populations, kind of culturally and politically active and specific. So in the US, you have groups like the Human Rights Council, and they're advocating for both workplace issues as well as general lifestyle issues that directly impact the lives and well-being of LGBTQ persons. I actually just joined a group called Out in Tech, and it's probably similar to the one that Rench was mentioning, but the one that I'm working on, I'm going to be a mentor for younger LGBTQ persons that are interested in getting involved in either developing new technologies or starting a company. So that's particularly an Austin-based chapter of a larger organization, but there are a lot of, if you look at your specific area, especially when it comes to tech, put in your city, put in technology, put in LGBTQ, sort of a multifaceted search, and you will find something. And if you don't find anything, that's what we're here for.
Exactly. So on the screen, the last slide was UK charities. I kind of flicked over that quite quickly, and I can't go back, so apologies. Those were the US, and then this is a deck that we can send out afterwards, but these are all sort of articles that were written by the likes of BCG, McKinsey, The Guardian, even the government, just sort of talking about what it is to be LGBTQ, and sort of what it means, particularly in a business context, to sort of look after, to foster and promote sort of that as a workforce internally. So I hope that these will all be good resources. We've only got a couple of minutes left of the webinar, so I wanted to just open the opportunity for anyone who's joined into this as a live recording to ask any questions. Obviously, if you're watching this as a recording, then please do reach out to either myself, Andrew, or Andy on our Blue Prism email addresses. If you want to get hold of Rench, then I would say either email me and I can put you in touch, or Rench, I suppose,
LinkedIn.
if you don't mind, LinkedIn, yeah, get hold of her on LinkedIn. So by all means, please use the chat function to ask any burning questions you might have. Whilst we're waiting for the avalanche of questions to come in, I'll maybe ask if there's sort of any final reflections that you wanted to share. And Rench, I'll start with you.
No pressure on the big summary. Well, I think yeah, honestly, reflecting, like, if you're going through like a hard time or anything, don't be afraid to like reach out. And hopefully you've got your friends, but if you feel isolated, then do look to the communities that are being shared. When I was in London, actually, I enjoyed pre-coronavirus, obviously, going to meetups and things like that, and made a great selection of friends. Some of them, I'm friends with them now. But don't be afraid to reach out to a therapist or a counselor if you really feel like that could help. There's no shame in actually doing that, and hopefully within your own work network, also reach out to people, because the key part is talking and actually like not being afraid to be yourself, and you should be able to feel comfortable. So just don't be afraid to like talk about it, and hopefully be yourself.
really great advice, and I can totally attest to the therapy angle. Like it's gotten me through an awful lot of stuff, and it's just nice to have a bit of third-party validation to be like, you're not weird. This is just, normal thoughts and normal things that people go through. And I guess particularly as a Blue Prism employee, you can actually access the employee advice line. So reach out to your manager if you don't know the number of. I don't know off by heart, unfortunately. Otherwise, I would read it out like we were on a game show. But by all means, like ring them up, and there's sort of 24-hour advisors who can help, and there are specific LGBTQ advisors there. So if you are struggling or you're finding it really tough, and you don't want to talk to someone that you know or internal to the business, it's an anonymous helpline. So by all means, reach out, and I think it's also on the intranet as well. Andy and Andrew, any sort of final reflections that you'd like?
Yeah, I think I'm really glad that we had this session overall, and it was so wonderful to have Rench join the session as well, to know that, this is not just something that we can do as our own company. We do need to partner with other companies as well to make this reality. And I hope that this can be, the start of something great for our LGBTQ plus organization within Blue Prism. Very open to hearing from all the attendees on the session what they'd like to see the group do, and how else we can contribute to the company culture.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Andy. This is the beginning, I suppose, of the Blue Prism Pride ERG, and we haven't really done a huge amount. COVID has kind of got in the way slightly. I'll take that as my excuse, but we are hoping to sort of build this out and grow it ever more. So please, if you want to get involved, even just as an ally, we'd really appreciate getting involved. Andrew.
Yeah, I think I would just close with take this as a kickoff to starting conversations, whether it's with small groups, one-on-one, or in future Pride events. I think that particularly in the age of COVID, we need community. We need to be connected, having conversations, and we really will thrive and blossom until we get to the other side of all of this. I think through communal understanding and just working together. So getting to know people on a more personal level sometimes, maybe that's what you need at this point. But we're definitely here to be a part of it.
A really good point, and I think don't suffer in silence. Reach out, and we, through COVID, through all of this, we'll get through it. So really good sentiments. Thanks, Andrew. And if you're based in the US and looking for a point of contact, Andrew is your guy. Joni, I know that you've said that there are a couple of questions come in. I can't get hold of them. Are you able to potentially read them out just before we?
Yep, sure. We do have a couple, and just so everyone knows, if we can't get to all of them in the last couple of minutes, I'll send them to everyone and we'll get your answers for you for sure.
Sure.
And thanks to everyone for this panel, first and foremost. If we run out of time, it was extremely enlightening, and I have to echo Andy's sentiment about hopefully we won't have to have these kind of meetings ever again or very soon. Anyway, real quickly, and it is kind of a big one, how can I be an ally if a colleague isn't supportive of the LGBTQ community?
I guess the question, how can they be an ally? I don't know if I fully understand, sorry. Is it that
if a colleague isn't supportive of LGBTQ community, maybe how can they help them understand?
Oh, I see. Well, I would say sharing, even this recording, sharing some of the slides. Sorry, I think the internet went a bit funny, Andrew. You can jump in.
Oh no, I was just going to echo that as well. Really, it's hard to hate people when you are close up to them. So again, maybe it's connecting that person somehow casually with somebody who's in the LGBTQ community that you know of. especially where they have a mutual respect for each other, or they have, you know, other things in common. But just, you know, I tend to see it as bringing people together closer and seeing the humanness in each other.
Just to give an example, that I've had a few colleagues who, whether because of their cultural upbringing, you know, they didn't, you know, they weren't. So even recently, I had a colleague who happened to be Latvian, and they, when I said, oh, I'm gay and have a partner, they were like, oh, I don't really understand like why gay people celebrate Pride or have kids. And you mentioned out in tech leadership actually, and I had tickets to the event, so I ended up taking them to the event with, you know, the head of the LGBT network called Prism at Pride. And there was a Stonewall speaker who talked about the historical significance of them. And actually, through, originally they weren't happy to sign stuff in the company, you know, saying supporting LGBT network, and then hilariously, and I couldn't even have predicted this, they ended up coming out as sapiosexual and actually open to dating women, and I was like, no way. So, you know, sometimes there is an educational piece, sometimes there is a part where you do have to just demonstrate, well, actually, I'm not defined by my sexuality. Like, you know, I'm listed as, you know, top 100 most influential women in tech. You know, who I am as a person is made up of so many different elements and parts. If you're prejudiced against one part of me, that is not okay, because then you're actually ignoring all these other facets to my personality. So sometimes you can build rapport in the areas that you may have that common interest, and then show, well, actually your perceptions of what a gay woman is or who they are or what that represents is potentially completely wrong. You know, I've had colleagues presume that every lesbian or bisexual has spiky hair and wear shirts, and I'm like standing there in a dress with my nails painted. I'm like, no, that's wrong. So you can change that perception, and hopefully it helps influence others to change it too.
So hopefully that answered the question, Joni. We are out of time now. So for everyone who did send in questions that we didn't get to, I do apologise, but we will we'll answer them. Joni will share them afterwards, and I think what we can do is answer them either via email or maybe on our Yammer page. So thanks to everyone for joining, and a big thanks to Rench for joining, and also to Andy and Andrew. And hopefully, you know, now that you have met the three of us internal to Blue Prism, if you have any questions or concerns, you know, please do feel that you can reach out and ask us any questions, to share resources or the slides that we've presented today. And indeed, like Rench said, if you want to, you know, reach out to Rench, then please do get in touch with her on LinkedIn. Just don't bombard her with too much, you know, please do you sort of use this network that you've garnered today. So big thanks to everyone for joining, and that was the first of the sessions for this week of inclusivity. So please do join some of the other ones later in the week, and have a good rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.